Hello, and welcome back to Avon Talks. My name is Ethan Guo. What is a library? To some, it's a repository of knowledge for study and research. To others, it's a place to borrow novels and movies and to get lost in worlds of figment and imagination, or a public space to get work done and access different community resources. In the greater American story, public libraries have been the homes of some of the greatest self-starting entrepreneurs and the cradle for world-changing academic research and literature. In this episode, we are going to explore the development of one specific public library nestled right here in Avon, Connecticut. The Avon Free Public Library has had a long history, from being transplanted across the town to developing an evolving identity as the needs of libraries and information literacy have changed with the digital age. Joining us today is Glenn Grube, the director of the Avon Free Public Library, and Cal Miller of Miller Farms. Thank you both so much for being here with us today. Cal, could you tell us a little bit about your history with the town of Avon?
Well, our family moved to Avon in 1950, and so I went to Topaz School, first grade, 1956. Mm-hmm. And my family has lived and worked in the town for the last 75 years. Mm-hmm. Over the time, we've transitioned from chicken farm, turkey farm, food distribution, USDA plant, making a natural pet food now that we ship all over. So I've seen Avon change over these last 75 years. Mm-hmm. My expression now is, I live a song and a half from anything.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been here for 75 years. I think you're probably one of the people who knows Avon history the best as from like a personal point of view. I was sort of wondering, could you tell us a little bit about what Avon was like back then, what the town was like? Obviously very different from now. For one thing, I don't think there are as many cars.
When you speak of cars, Ethan, on 44, where the old library and across from the old library, that's where our post office was. Mm-hmm. You could park right on 44. In sixth grade, we had to do something about the town, and I believe there were 5,600 people at the time that lived in Avon. It has transitioned immensely. Mm-hmm. I think in looking back, it was definitely the farmers, the electricians, the carpenters, the bricklayers. A lot of them had moved over from Italy, and they were workers. And then we had the top of the mountain, which the wealthy people lived, the insurance people, the doctors, the lawyers, and many of their children didn't go to the public school system. So it was definitely a working class town.
And so in this old Avon, the Avon Free Public Library, it wasn't always at its present location, right? You know this better than anyone. You actually frequented the library
every
when
other
you were
Wednesday.
Growing up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was originally located actually on Route 44, which is where the post office is right now. Could you tell us a little bit about what the library was like back in these earlier days?
It first exposed me to books. Mm-hmm. My parents came from farming backgrounds, and they may have read the paper, but I never remember them seeing them with a book in their hand. Mm-hmm. And so this exposed me to books. Mm-hmm. I was telling my husband the other night, the first book I remember reading was George Washington Carver. And I remember sitting at the dinner table that night and just crying because I couldn't believe that people could treat people that way.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I was sort of thinking about when formulating these show notes for this episode is that America in general, it was a very different time. And part of that difference is this was pre-internet, meaning information and the travel of information and our awareness of different parts of the country as intimately as we are aware of them now. It was simply different. So I don't want to really put words in your mouth, but I feel like the library might have been one of these sources of information about the greater world.
One word, encyclopedia. That was the internet back then. It was always available at the library, and I would say if I asked Siri, it would be the encyclopedia. They should have called Siri the encyclopedia, so So that is the difference. I don't know. You want me to? Every other Wednesday, we would walk to the library. The opposite Wednesday, we would have bank day, and you could put your 10 cents in or quarter, if you were lucky, in a savings account. So we would walk across from Towpath, where I would cut through Woodford. And it was just like yesterday, you follow like little ducks in a path following it. And 44 was not busy. I can't imagine now they'd put up, a $8,000 stoplight to cross. But it was very easy, and it was a fun day because you got out, and it introduced me personally to books. And Mrs. Norman was the librarian, I believe her name was at the time. And she just had this welcoming smile and made books to be fun and to, we'd have a little reading hour, I think, and then you'd have a half hour to explore the library or read on your own. And you could take the books out and get them stamped and the date stamp, and 2 weeks later you'd have to return them and so on.
What was it like walking into the library, experiencing it physically? What was the library like back then?
First off, I remember walking in the door, and it was a large, open, high ceiling. Of course, I was younger then, but it was the biggest ceiling I had ever seen. And there were books all over. So it's probably, give an example now, if you walked into a huge cathedral or something so overwhelming at that, and so it was an adventure. And they had cushions that you could sit on and so on. And downstairs was a special room maybe for documentaries or something. But the upstairs was always welcoming and warming. And that, as I say, walking in, it was so impressive. It's like, wow. It was a whole different, it was out of my bandwidth.
You mentioned Mrs.
Norman, I
believe.
Yes.
Yeah, as one of these, as like the librarian who you experienced back then as being like this very friendly, welcoming figure. Obviously, the library today is a huge center within the community, and people obviously knew about the library. It was obviously integrated within the community, but I was wondering, to what extent was it also a sort of community center back then, or was this sort of before being a community center was part of its mission?
To my knowledge, it was just the library for books. And as things evolved, and we were talking earlier about it, but it was just for books.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you sort of highlighted then is the library was a different place back then. It had a different identity. It was filling a different role. And I feel like it's hard to compare the two just because of how different they were. However, I think one similarity that they do still have is that the library was still called the Free Public Library back then, correct?
Glenn probably has he has a better concept of...
Yeah, so the Avon Free Public Library differentiated it from some libraries that were subscription libraries, and the earliest libraries in Avon were subscription libraries. That's a setup where you pay to be a member, and the original thought in the Avon subscription libraries that started as early as the late 18th century was that money was pooled and used to buy the collection of books that then the subscribers could borrow and access. I don't know exactly when they started to call it the Avon Free Public Library, but I know by the time the building on Route 44 was built in 1932, it was known as the Avon Free Public Library, and it was supported by the town's Board of Selectmen and their finances, and they provided money to pay a librarian and upkeep the building and pay for the collection of books. So it became a benefit to those who lived in town to be able to access that library.
And I think this is a good pivot, actually, to moving on from the historic portion of the library to more of the evolution of the Avon Free Public Library. The library purchased its current location in the 1970s and moved into it beginning in 1982. Could you talk a little bit about what the inspiration behind this expansion was and why they thought of it as necessary?
I think a large part of it had to do with simply space. The town's population was growing. In 1970, there were about 8,300 people living in Avon. By 1980, it was 11,000. They were seeing 34% population growth, highest in the Farmington Valley in the mid-'70s. So they were smart to look ahead and realize that the space for the books and the people needed to expand. Route 44 was being developed, and it made sense to move to another location where they'd have the space to expand. And they also chose a location that was near the geographic center of town.
That's interesting that you mentioned the geographic center, though, because the middle school and the high school and the library are in like one center, but the town, City Hall is in another center. It's interesting that they decided to move the library away from the town City Hall. Do you know what the decision behind that was?
Yeah, it predates my time working for the town. I was in elementary school at the time the decision was made, so
Baby.
I don't have the specifics of that. But my guess is it was just easier to get a large chunk of land a little off that main drag. Avon's an interesting town in that the town center is thought of as Route 44, but that's not really the geographic center of town, and it's not always the most walkable, pedestrian-friendly type of center that it was in Cal's youth, because Route 44 has been built up. It's a major avenue for commuters, so morning and evening, tons of traffic, a lot of retail. There's a part of me that thinks a library would be great right there because we'd have a ton of traffic going by, but they seem to find us on Country Club Road too. We're not lacking for visitors.
How many visitors do you get?
We do it.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
We do a daily door count, and it varies, but between around 800, 900 people a day coming to the library is not unusual.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really. Plus, you have more activities and things like.
Correct.
Our historical society will meet there.
Sure. Yes,
once
it's
a
not
month.
all
You
just
have
folks
other
borrowing
rooms.
and returning books. I know we'll
more
get into
community.
that, but there's a lot of activities at the library. I believe last month in January, the total for the month was just under 13,000 people. So.
Wow.
And so what changed after this expansion? So obviously the town outgrew basically the old library.
Yes.
What were new implementations within its current location that changed?
That's a great question. So there was obviously more space for the library. We were able to expand their collections. They were able to join in an online library network called Success that was rather novel back in the 80s. They connected back to a mainframe computer in Windsor and shared a database of books and patrons with a couple dozen other libraries in the greater Hartford area. They expanded the collection beyond just books and started including things like books on tape. The earliest audiobooks, which were literally on cassette tapes. Sometimes you'd have, if it's a long book, dozens and dozens of cassette tapes. In this case, added video cassettes, VHS video cassettes to the collection. And that was kind of novel at the time, too, in the 80s. And focused largely on kind of foreign films or classics, things like that, for two reasons. First of all, it used to be incredibly expensive to buy a new feature film when it first was released on VHS. It could cost $100. So we also didn't want the library to compete with video stores. That was the heyday of the not just Blockbuster, but the mom and pop video stores, and we weren't looking to undercut them by letting you borrow a videotape when you could go rent it for $3 at a store that was trying to make some money. So we kind of found our niche on the foreign films and classics. The beginning of the computer revolution and the internet, too. The library used to loan CD-ROMs at the time, whether they were games or learning activities on a CD-ROM. And during the 80s and 90s, the library actually produced its own CD-ROM of a business directory of Avon, where they would gather information about local businesses, directory information and contact information and things like that. and publish it on a CD-ROM that they would sell to cover the costs of, burning the discs and gathering the information. So, and more programming too. Story times were always popular in libraries, and it's a great way to get kids interested and to love reading and
That's a great area
and
they
books.
have
Yeah.
upstairs there.
But
That's awesome.
they also started to do music programs and lectures and book discussions for adults and things like that, having that new space.
So this was sort of like the beginning of the Avon Free Public Library taking its role as a leader and center for the community to sort of gather within Avon.
I would say so, yeah. The square footage jumped up to like over 13,000 square feet when we got the building on Country Club Road from, I think the building on 44 was about 8,000 square feet. So, right.
And now you already talked a little bit about like some of the different technologically and like informationally innovative measures that you guys took to make the library not only sort of like keeping up with its time, but almost a little ahead of its time. I was wondering though, physically, so from 1982 to 2012, it's in the same space, but in 2012, the library went through a huge renovation. I was wondering, between 1982 and 2012, did the library stay stagnant throughout that time physically, or was it still continuing to evolve?
We're always evolving and we're always tweaking our space, but there was a renovation project in 1997, kind of between the original construction in 82 and the major renovation in 2012. In 1997, there was an addition that added about 4,500 square feet. It provided a dedicated children's programming space, so instead of just on the floor of the children's section of the library, they had some closed-off rooms where they could do children's programming without interfering with folks who were just browsing for books. That renovation also helped with ADA compliance, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which didn't exist in 1982 when the building was constructed, so we made it more accessible for users with disabilities. There was also a lot of upgraded wiring for electrical and computer networking, because again in 82 we weren't thinking that public access computers were a thing. There were a couple of dumb terminals for the staff to use to connect back to that mainframe computer to check books in and out, but there was no internet per se that the public would want to access, or word processing wasn't a thought. So that 97 renovation was important to keep things going.
And throughout this entire process, how was the town involved? Because the Free Public Library back was on Route 44, and even going forward, like historically, these libraries have all been not necessarily exclusively private, but a lot of them weren't like associated with the town. I was wondering what the process was like of getting this formally established with the town of Avon and harmful.
It's incredibly helpful. So the Avon Free Public Library is a nonprofit corporation, still is, was incorporated in the 50s. But in the 1970s, I believe it was 78, there was an agreement with the town that the town would kind of take over a lot of the management of the library and a lot of the funding of the library. So the nonprofit corporation still exists. We have a board of directors. They control a certain amount of money, and they're in charge of setting library policy, library hours. They employ the library director, me, but the town provides about 93% of all our funding. They own the building and the land that the library stands on, and so that means we can rely on the town's public works staff for repairs and maintenance at the building, snow removal, landscaping, things like that, which is incredibly helpful that we can focus on just running a library. The library personnel are all under the town's personnel rules, so we don't have to run our own HR. So the town's involvement has been incredibly helpful. So that agreement happened in the late 70s. The nonprofit corporation acquired the land that the library stands on now and gave it to the town. And then the town constructed the building. So it's been a very mutually beneficial agreement. I think it's made the library prosper, and in turn, I think the library helps the Avon community greatly.
We've essentially moved 60, 70 years ahead in history from the 1950s to 2010, 2020. And so we're really getting into modern territory. And I think there's the big 2012 renovation to talk about.
Yep.
But before we get to that, I think this is also the period of time where you started getting personally involved within the Avon Free Public Library. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in working with libraries and what your journey was like leading up to getting your job as the director?
Sure. So I've worked in libraries pretty much my whole life. I was a big reader when I was younger, and my first real job, other than cutting lawns and babysitting and stuff, was at the Wells Turner Memorial Library in Glastonbury, where I grew up. I went down and applied when I turned 16 and got a job reshelving books at the Wells Turner Library. Enjoyed it and ended up working there part-time while I went to college. I went to Trinity College in Hartford, so Glastonbury was just over the river, and was able to come back and work in the summers at Wells Turner. Went from reshelving books to checking books out. When I finished my degree at Trinity, I got a job at a medical library for a little while. And from there ended up going to library school.
What was your major?
I was an English major.
Yeah,
with
that's fine.
Oh, sorry.
I was an English major with a concentration in creative writing.
Oh, okay.
I'm also an English major right now.
Ah,
Yeah, it's a great major, but when you get out, then you're like, okay, now what do I do? Because if you don't want to teach, there's a lot you can do, but you have to kind of focus. And I realized I've really enjoyed working in libraries. I've experienced working in libraries. So the medical library was a bit of a detour because I realized I don't really want to work in a medical library. I was most of the patrons there were doctors, nurses, and or other medical professionals who were researching really specific issues related to the cases they're working on or related to the education that they were doing. So I ended up back in public libraries and going to library school, where I got a master's degree in library and information science from Southern Connecticut State University. After that, I worked at several libraries. I worked at the Manchester Public Library for a number of years and at the West Hartford Public Library for a number of years. I worked part-time as a reference librarian at Avon Free Public Library in the early 2000s. That was my first experience in Avon. I worked weekends and evenings kind of as a fill-in reference librarian. And it was a great library, but I ended up taking the full-time job in West Hartford for about 13 years. And then I was lucky enough to come to Avon right after that 2012 expansion. The grand opening was, I believe, in April of 2012 after that expansion, and I took over as the library director in December of 2012.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned getting a master's in
Library and Information Science.
In that. So I think, I mentioned this because I think a lot of people are unaware of how much goes into being a librarian. And, when you see a librarian, you think, they organize some events, they organize books, but it's more than that.
Definitely.
And so I was wondering, could you maybe talk a little bit about that, and also sort of the evolving landscape of being a librarian, especially approaching the modern age?
Yeah. It's changed a lot, and it continues to change. I think one of the biggest misconceptions folks have is either that you read all day or that most of the people you see working in the library are volunteers, and neither are true. While we do have some volunteers who work at the library, most of the staff are paid staff, and generally, to be called a quote-unquote librarian, to work as a professional librarian, you need a master's degree in library science. That covers a lot of different things. When I got my degree in the 90s, it was a lot less technical than it is today because technology has changed information science so much. Before Google and the internet and all that, there was really a very different way to access information, needing to know which reference books you would go to point you to the information you needed. Nowadays, so much of that is automated that it's really a different profession than when I studied. The technology has changed it a great deal because folks at home can type a search into Google and end up with thousands and thousands of results. So right now what librarians do, instead of finding some very scarce information and preserving it and delivering it to folks who need it, what we try and help folks do is work their way through the glut of information that's out there to find the information that's most accurate and most relevant to their specific information need. That's one type of librarian. That's your reference librarian. We also have children's librarians whose job it is to help kids with literacy, whether that's actually learning to read and backing up what the teachers do at school, avoiding that summer slide by making sure that those young readers continue to read in June, July, and August, or just capturing kids' imagination and making them love to read and love stories. We spoke earlier in the episode about how books can really connect you to things that might be outside your normal experience, and that's so true. We try and do that at the Avon Library all the time, is use books and literature and our programming as doors and windows into other people's experiences that you might not find here in Avon, or they might be right here in Avon, but they're not your personal experiences. So that's one way it's changed, the technology. The other thing that's changed so much is the fact that the library is now so much more a community center. Folks don't just come in to borrow books and then leave. They come to study. They come to go to public meetings. They come to work from home. Folks use our library all the time for the fast, stable internet connections because they don't have a printer at home or a fax at home. So they come to use that, to use a study room for a meeting or a Zoom call. And the other thing that librarians do a lot now is social services kind of work. We deal with folks who need help applying for a job. If you don't have computer literacy and the only way to submit your resume and application to a job is online, it's not just if you don't have internet access at home. Maybe you don't know how to use a mouse. Maybe you don't know how to navigate an online fillable PDF, and we help with that. We help connect folks with other social services they might need, whether it's fuel assistance in the winter or how to fill out the FAFSA form for their children who are applying to college. So all kinds of ways. The library is really the way folks interact with government most, perhaps other than the post office. It's the government institution that people interact with the most, I think.
So what prompted the library to undertake this very significant step in renovations? I mean, the 2012 library, and I'm going to mention this for future historians who are looking at this as a timeless oral history, piece of oral history. But, you know, at least in 2024, the 2012 renovation is like the current library that Avon has. And it's a beautiful building, and it's a massive building. So I was sort of wondering, what prompted this expansion? Was it similar to the 1982 one where it sort of just outgrew its place, or?
Yeah, so space was a large part of it. So it went from about 18,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet, so more than double the space. The Avon population wasn't growing quite as fast. I think we went from about 11,000 folks in 1980 to about 18,000 residents in 2012. There was actually a bit of controversy about the expansion in the sense that people were saying, with the internet, with ebooks, why do we need more space for the library? And I think we've done a pretty good job of showing why. But I mentioned the local history room. In addition, we completely renovated and expanded the children's section on the second floor. It's a beautiful space now that has dedicated programming room for story time, also has an art studio for children, reading nooks, a puppet theater. It's wonderful. If you've got young children, I really encourage, and you haven't, I encourage you to come down and check it out. Also on the second floor, we added a dedicated teen room, and that was really important. I mentioned the walkable nature of the middle school and the high school. We get between 30 and 60 kids after school each day, usually coming down to hang out at the library, and we love it. But before we had a dedicated teen room, not everybody loved it because 30 kids competing with adults who want to read quietly or study doesn't always work
They
well.
need their own space.
Yeah, so now that they've got their own space,
That's
and we
great.
also hired a full-time teen librarian who handles the collection and the programming for that demographic. So they've got their own room upstairs. It's got a big screen TV with a Nintendo
That's what they
Switch.
need.
It's
Yeah.
got computers. It's got a collection of books aimed at that age level, and regular programming for those kids after school. So the teen room was another big part of it. We have had a community room in the library for, as far as I know, since the '82 edition, but we were able to expand and improve that community room in the 2012 renovation. And one of the big things we did is we made it kind of separate from the rest of the library, so it can be accessed even outside of library hours. So if the Historical Society or another community group like Encore for Avon or the Flower Club or any of those folks want to use the library before we're open, after we're closed, on a Sunday in the summer when we're not open, you can borrow a key and sign a release form and access the community room outside of library hours.
Yeah, I mean, 2 notes. I was going to mention the teen room. I think one thing that people might think of it as is like, just books for teens. But I remember in middle school when I went to school here, I would go to the teen room sometimes after school, get on one of the laptops and just play video games, which is probably not what it was meant for. But it definitely is like a really nice resource and also just a place to hang out. It's not just a place for books anymore.
Absolutely.
And I think the library has done a really good job at evolving out of this like just books.
Because that's a tough age.
Yeah,
And
no, books are still at our core, but for all ages, we want the library to be a place where you can just hang out. We like Cal mentioned the puzzles before. We have puzzles out for people who want to just come in and work on a puzzle. We have a group of folks who come in every day to read the newspaper at the library instead of at home, and I'm sure they could probably afford to subscribe to a newspaper at home, but it's a more social event
community involvement
to do
is
that.
what the library, I see, has when we go there.
It's the new town square. It's where you're going to bump into your neighbors. It's where you're going to learn about another community event or what's going on in town. It's another thing that's changed about libraries is not always a quiet space. We do try and have quiet study areas for folks who need that, but you're not going to get shushed at the Avon Library. We want folks to enjoy it, and sometimes that means talking, and sometimes that means talking in a little bit louder voice. We have children's programs, we have music concerts, we have all kinds of things that make noise, and then we also have quiet study rooms you can sign up for if you need some silence to do your studying.
I think this is an interesting way, an interesting pivot, but sort of part of this evolving identity. I was wondering, what are some of the current flagship initiatives then that the Avon Free Public Library is working on or has been working on?
Sure. So a couple that I'll mention. One is very relevant to a history podcast and the Historical Society. Last year, Avon got a $50,000 federal grant as part of a program called Save America's Treasures, and we're working closely with the Historical Society to catalog, preserve, and digitize the 19th century history of Avon. We're working with Terry and her team at the Historical Society
working with that.
to get all of the different artifacts that they have examined, make sure that they're being stored and preserved in proper manners, and entering them into online databases. There's the Connecticut Digital Archive for paper artifacts and Connecticut Collections for physical things. So that's been a huge project that's taking up a lot of our adult services librarians' time and paying dividends. Again, on our website, you'll see regular posts about some of the neat things we've found during that project.
A lot involvement in the community, from young to old to past to present and the future.
Speaking of the future, so we just this month put in an electric vehicle charger in the library's parking lot. So looking ahead to more EVs on the road. So it's a dual port charger. It can charge 2 cars. It's kind of a pilot program for the town to see how that works at municipal buildings. So the first Avon Town building to have an EV car charger.
And
so
it's now working?
it's
All right,
yep,
good.
it's live as
I know
of last
somebody-
week.
If I do.
Yep.
And also, I think
tell them where to go.
the idea that the town was like, where would we put something to test out something for the future? The idea that the thought was the library first shows just what a role the library plays as the community center.
Because people are probably how long does it take? An hour, half hour, or depending
I don't
upon...
drive an EV. I think it depends on how much charge you need. It's a level 2 charger, so it's not the super fast one. So you do need to leave it plugged in for a little while to
people are
to
in
get
the
a good
library,
charge.
make it practicable. Whoever thought that out, that was...
Yeah, well, we worked with the town on it. We
Good
received,
job. It
we-
was your
yeah,
it was
we
your
received,
idea, right, Glenn?
Sure.
It was Glenn's idea.
We'll say it's Glenn's idea.
We'll say it. I'm sticking to that one. Okay.
We're spreading misinformation today.
No, librarians don't like misinformation.
No,
we like
we-
accurate information.
No, but also I think part of these initiatives is that you guys also work with youth a lot, as in the school system.
Absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned the summer reading, but could you also talk about like some of the other initiatives that you do with kids?
Sure. So our children's and teen services staff reach out to the schools all the time. We've got folks in the schools regularly, both talking up library programs and talking up just books in general. One of the neatest collaborations we have with the school is the kindergarten field trips. When Avon students are in kindergarten, one of their field trips each year is a trip to the library where they get their first library card.
Do they walk to the library?
They don't. They're bused. Yes, they're not as lucky as you, Cal. They come in buses. They come upstairs. We usually schedule them just before the library opens at about 9:30, so they're not competing with other folks. They come upstairs. They get a story time. They get a little lesson in how to use the library. That these books are all for them, but they have to care for them when they borrow them. And they get their first library card. They get to look around and choose a couple books to check out, and then they go back to school. So that's always a fun trip to see.
That's great.
For the kids who are a little older, we just Pine Grove School, it's Thompson Brook School is doing a book battle right now, where they selected like 14 different titles, and they encourage all the 5th and 6th graders to read those books and kind of vote for which one's the best, and the classes compete. So we've helped with that too by getting extra copies of all those books and putting them in a special section of our collection to support the schools that way. So yeah, we certainly try and help and support the Avon schools and lots of different Avon institutions. Throughout, we have great partnerships with the Avon Senior Center, looking at the other side of the demographics. We do collaborative programming with them, everything from how to choose the right Medicare plan to, we did a program on elder orphans recently, folks who are aging solo without a partner or without children to help them. And fun things too, just, movie and book discussions and things too that the Senior Center will help us with. We've had a great partnership with the Avon Clean Energy Commission and doing programs about the environment and about nature. Farmington Valley Health District is another good partner of ours, and we've done a lot of work with them on mental health and wellness, and we'll continue to do that. We've had programs on suicide prevention and mental health first aid that were sponsored by the Farmington Valley Health District.
So we're approaching our time limit for this, but I feel like the library is like such a big part of the community that honestly there could be multiple episodes done about each specific program that they do, and they would probably be very interesting episodes. But I think I want to touch on 2 points, 2 very important points before we close. The first point is sort of a question about the decorations that are up in the library. So my first impression of walking into the library, this is when I was like 10 or 12, walking into the library, I saw a model airplane hanging from the ceiling. I was wondering, what is the thought process behind obtaining like a model airplane and hanging it from the ceiling, and also just in general, What was the sort of atmosphere that you guys were trying to curate when choosing these sorts of decorations?
Sure. So that plane is actually a scale model recreation of one of the Wright brothers' first planes. And we did that, I'm not remembering the year now, but approaching 10 years ago. And we did a one-book program on the David McCullough book, The Wright Brothers. So we encouraged everyone in town. It was Avon reads one book. We encouraged everyone in town to read that book, and we did a whole bunch of programming around the Wright brothers, the invention of the airplane. We had folks from Sikorsky Helicopter come and talk, and we had historians talk, and we talked about aviation. And one aspect of that program was we did a community build of this model. So that was not a model that we just
Cal,
said,
did you personally work on it?
No,
or-
I didn't, but I saw it.
Yeah.
People were
So,
working
right.
on that. They were engineers.
Yep. We had
Yeah.
a group of community volunteers who came in a couple times a week and worked in the middle of the atrium, so not locked away somewhere. Everyone could walk by and be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
We're building a scale model of the Wright brothers' first plane. So it was a community project. They built that. And we couldn't just put it away after that. So our wonderful public works crew worked with us and helped us find a way to hang it from the ceiling. So yeah, if you come in, it's right in our atrium near the magazines and periodicals. So come in and take a look.
And then also the stairwell up to the second floor, those, the books there change all the time. But also there's the murals and stuff. What was the thought process behind designing those?
So in the stairwell, we do have a rotating display of books. The children's staff put those up.
Excuse
based
me,
on
that's a
different
great
seasons.
idea. When I go up to the meetings, it's like, because you go to stairwells, they're always so blank.
Yeah.
And it could have been blank, but it's like, who thought of this? This is great. Right away it, increases your imagination or question, whoever.
Yep.
It was a great idea. So,
Yeah.
again, Glenn's his idea. Let's give him credit for that one.
And yeah, we've got our gallery too, where we have rotating art displays all the time. The children's department has a number of different display cases. We actually just got a new display case to replace one of our aging ones the other day. And they change out those displays on a regular basis too. We basically just want to engage everyone's imagination. We want to encourage them to come to the library, make sure they understand it's a vital place. Sure, we've got historical documents and a climate-controlled archive for some of those things, but it's a living organization that changes all the time. Every time you come in, it should be different and experience something else.
Yeah, I sort of mentioned decorations because it feels like something that is, just on the side, but I think it's these small things that, like, you guys spend a lot of effort curating, and Cal mentioned this even. It's these small things that, like, sort of really build and, like, flush out the sort of experience and the community that the library is trying to create.
Comfortable chairs.
Yeah.
Little nooks.
We always want to market ourselves because as many visits as we have and as many card holders as we have and as many books as we circulate, I just think everyone in the community should be at the library because there's so many great things. So we want to make it interesting and exciting for everyone. We want to reflect everyone's type of interests there.
So visit our library.
And get the word out. So thank you for inviting us to
Thank
talk
you.
a little bit today
Thank you,
about the
Ian.
library.
Yes.
This podcast is an Avon Historical Society production, edited by me, Ethan Guo. Special thanks to Priscilla Marshall for the graphics. If you would like to support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever else podcasts are downloaded. Want to be featured on a future episode or stay up to date with the podcast newsletter? Feel free to reach out to us at avontalksahs@gmail.com. For more on the Avon Historical Society, visit www.avonhistoricalsociety.org.